Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Patrick Henrik, and on behalf of my Uncle Pat Lynch and the rest of our family, we welcome you to our home this afternoon and morning to mourn the death of, but more importantly, we're celebrating Dr. Donald Kuhn's life. Before we celebrate the services, we just ask that everybody please take a moment, silence your cell phones so we don't have interruptions. Today's services will be fairly informal. We'll be sharing memories. Don's family will be sharing some remarks. After his family comes forward and shares and eulogizes Don, we'll invite anybody from the crowd to share memories if they wish to. You're welcome to come up to the podium, use the microphone, or simply stand where you're sitting and share a memory. We do ask kindly that you just keep it closer to 2 minutes rather than 20 minutes, obviously, but everybody is more than welcome to share any memories they have. Before we do start that portion of the services, our bagpiper Jim Lyons is here. He's going to start with a song. Thank you all. So the order today, we'll have Catherine come forward and share some memories, followed by her brother, and then her husband Steve will come forward and share memories. At the conclusion of Steve's words, anybody again in the crowd, if they wish to, you're welcome to come forward or stand where you are and share a memory. Catherine.
Hi, my name is Catherine. I'm Don's daughter, and I want to thank everybody for coming and sharing so many sweet memories of my dad. I'm going to try and get through this without too much blubbering, but it's already started. My dad is somewhere laughing because he knew how much I disliked public speaking and that I would be, quote, shitting a brick, which I am. My dad was a brilliant scientist and a gifted intellectual. He was always the smartest guy in the room, but you wouldn't know it because he was so funny and down to earth. A lot of you guys here know the serious scientists worked on. We didn't know much about his work. It was a bit above our brain capacity, so I wanted to take the opportunity to tell you guys about the other side of my dad. My dad lived a very interesting life. In high school, he was a star athlete and went on to play college ball at Presbyterian College in South Carolina. He would dazzle us with stories of old school basketball where elbows were thrown and noses were broken, where you had to, quote, basketball fight, which just meant that you threw punches low so the rest wouldn't see you. He once told us about a bleacher clearing fight against Belmont Abbey. My dad was at the bottom of a pile of guys and he felt himself being pulled out. Turns out his dad had entered the melee, grabbed him by the feet, and removed him from the fight. My dad was quick to let us know that he was holding his own and didn't need to be rescued, but he was still rescued. When my kids were born, his life changed. He was the ultimate grandpa. When Lewis was a baby, he would stop by my house after work just to hold him while he cried. And Lewis did a lot of crying. One year, we rented a minivan and all drove to South Carolina together for our annual beach trip to Edisto Island. Paul was almost a year old, and no joke, he cried 8 of the 12 hours. My dad just took out his hearing aids and kept on driving, while I was ready to throw myself out of the car. When it was time to drive back, my dad bought us nonstop plane tickets from Charleston to Detroit. The plan was for him to drive the rental car back to Michigan, and we were going to have a quick, uneventful return trip. It didn't go that way. When we got to the airport, our flight was delayed and later canceled. I hesitated to tell my dad because he used thousands of frequent flyer miles on our tickets. When I finally called them, he was in West Virginia and later told me it was good timing because we were starting to get tired, but the news of our flight ordeal, quote, nearly gave him a stroke and rage fueled the remainder of his trip. In the end, we all arrived in Michigan at the same time. 13 hours of driving for him, and our nonstop flight turned into a layover in Atlanta where Stevie, my husband, saved a woman's arm from being shorn off by an airport train, lots and lots and lots of crying, and a diaper breach. We can look back on it now and laugh, but at the time, it was not awesome. Everything my dad owned was the best stereo equipment, the best cars, the fanciest wine, and the best kitchen gadgets. His generosity extended to the entire family. Whenever the kids wanted something expensive for their birthdays or Christmas, I would whisper, "Go ask Grandpa." One year, he took them to Modern Skate Shop where he spent hundreds of dollars on skateboards and wheels. He told me that he had Paul standing on his shoulders just so Paul could get the board he wanted. My dad loved food and he loved to cook. There was no recipe that was too complicated or ingredient list that was too long. We made dinner every Sunday, and most of those recipes turned out perfectly, but there were some that did not. One Christmas, we decided to try duck, and it was a disaster. The whole house filled with a thick duck smoke. We were all horrified, not my dad. He sat happily at the table, enjoying the rare, greasy duck breast, while the rest of us looked at each other wide-eyed, chewing each bite at least 100 times. My dad was a fascinating person. On one hand, you would look at his neat, orderly house and think, this guy keeps nothing. After he passed away, my brother found a file where he kept every letter we ever sent him. Birthday cards, letters from camp, and even a couple of letters from my mom, his first ex-old lady. My dad lived life to the fullest, and we could all look back and be inspired. Today, I want to celebrate him and his excellent life full of friends and family. I'm going to conclude with a quote that my dad would love. We both had an interesting and sometimes dark sense of humor. It's from author David Gerald, and it goes, "Life is hard, then you die, then they throw dirt in your face, then the worms eat you. Be grateful if it happens in that order."
So on the heels of what my sister said, I want to thank each and every one of you for showing up. It doesn't mean a lot. So, sorry. My dad instilled a couple of important things in my sister and I. Basketball, movies, and cars. And my favorite memory of my dad was basketball related. I was maybe 17 and was up visiting, and he and I went to YMCA, excuse me, and played a couple pickup games. And at one point, we ended up in a 2v2 fast break, and my dad was bringing the ball up the court. And sorry. I went off on the right wing, and he took it straight down the middle to draw the defenders in. And I watched my dad make direct eye contact with the defender in front of him just to sort of lock them in. And as soon as he crossed the free throw line, he executed an absolutely perfect no-look pass to me on the right wing. And what he did worked perfectly, because all they could do was hope I missed. I didn't pray very much when I played basketball, but I did say a small one when the ball left my hands. It wasn't a big shot in a big game. It was a pickup game at the Y, but it was a big shot for me. Nothing but net. I miss you, Dad.
I had a whole speech written. But there aren't a lot of words to talk about Don. He was all action. Seeing my kids lose their grandpa, it's hard. They were thick as thieves. Catherine and I could drop them off on a Saturday, pick them up on a Sunday, amped, Red Bull, candy. You send them to Target to get milk, and Don would bring it back with an Xbox. Paul told me a story one time where he let him swear for 5 minutes. So he's holding his watch, and Paul's like, I said, the F word? I said, like, what? Oh, don't worry about it, don't worry about it. Like our dinners. We'd say things to the kids like, if you do that in front of Grandma, she's gonna start crying. Because Grandma is perfect, right? Manners, everything. So we would try to instill that in the kids. And Paul wouldn't eat, or Louis would have his elbows on the table, and we'd try to get them to do what we thought they should do. And then Don would be kicking them under the table and pinching them, and he said, oh, he'd slide the food away, and all right, who's going to Dario? We're going to Dario, we're not eating fillets, but the kids can't come up here because, it's tough for them. And I get it. We'd go to Edstow every year. I can't swim. I'm not a swimmer. My kids swim like dolphins. Don was also a fantastic swimmer, and he's used to those rough South Carolina waters. He'd go out there with them, and he'd stand out there for hours. Day one, no matter what, Pam, he would be a lobster, right? Because no matter how much sunblock he put on, it was fair skin, and he'd be burnt for the whole trip, and that didn't matter. He'd still get in the water with them. He was the only one that would sit out there with them all day long, That's their buddy. You know, there was no bedtime at Grandpa's. You know, they always talked about his pancakes being better than ours, you know, better than, nobody made pancakes as good as Grandpa, right? To me, as an adult, he was a role model. You know, someone I could look up to, someone who shared the same beliefs as me. You know, we never were in the same tax bracket, but we agreed on almost everything. The conversations that we had, I feel like I was really lucky to be able to talk to him about life and food and politics and family, and hopefully he knows, you know, what he meant to all of us. I know I'll miss him, and, you know, I made him a promise that I would take care of Catherine. And she's been with me every day since I met her, and I know that made him happy too.
I won't go to the podium because I'm the ex-wife. But I was this young bride, and we dated during college, and I watched him play basketball for Spartanburg High School, and I watched him play basketball for Presbyterian, and I was always, rah-rah. And we married and ended up in Washington at National Institute of Health, and we parted. And I came to South Carolina, and my kids were here, but Don and I always kept a great relationship. We respected each other. And he would come to South Carolina, and I'd say, well, you can stay with us. I don't want you to stay anywhere else. You just stay with us. And the thing that, after his second wife, we had always gone to Edisto, and Don was sort of alone and in the dumps. And I said, Catherine, why don't you ask Don to come to Edisto with a family? And we did, to the great consternation of my boyfriend. He said, no, that's just not right. I said, you're just going to have to get over it because he's coming. And so we had 5 great years at Edisto, and I think it's a testament to us both that we got along so well and did it for our kids.
Good afternoon. My name is Jason Matika, and I apologize. This is going to go a little bit more than 2 minutes. But I was a friend, I was a colleague, and I was a collaborator of Don's at the Detroit VA. The memories I'm going to share today are not only personal memories, but they're also a combination of memories of individuals that knew Don for many, many decades. Working at the Detroit VA, so it's really a compilation from a number of different individuals that I'm going to share with you today. So Don was a research career scientist at the Detroit VA, and that's an award that recognizes excellence in scientists that have excelled in their field, and as a result of that, they're nationally and they're internationally recognized scientists. He was successful in publishing. He had just this fantastic publishing record. He had a stellar record of grantsmanship. He was continuously funded throughout his years. And both with regards to his publication record and his grantsmanship record, he was covering many, many different disciplines. So he would write grants on traumatic brain injury and on the Gulf War syndrome, on gut microbiome. And to be able to cross all these disciplines is not an easy task to do. And it just is a representation of, or a testament to Don's day-to-day consistency. He was always there. He was always available. He was dedicated, and obviously he had this very clear intellect. Don contributed to the research service at the Detroit VA in many ways over the years. So he served as an interim associate chief of staff at one point. He served as the deputy associate chief of staff. He also chaired the research and development committee and also chaired the research review committee. And in each and every case, he was really consistently a strong advocate for both the VA and also the research service itself. And one of his favorite points of advocacy, which was mentioned or thought not only by myself but many others, was his advocacy to inquire whether money that's linked to our grants that are referred to as Vera dollars was being reinvested back into the service for faculty development and infrastructure expansion. So we always appreciated Don for his willingness to advocate on our behalf, not only in that particular area, but in other areas as well. Don collaborated with many individuals at the Detroit VA as well as Wayne State University. And in many cases, his generosity was evident in his collaboration. So I collaborated with him over many years, and there's one particular collaboration that stood out to me as I was putting this together. So there was a young physician in the Department of Internal Medicine at Wayne State who wanted to incorporate clinical research into her portfolio. So I brought that individual over to Don, and Don was a basic scientist. He primarily worked with animal models, but he actually had put a grant together that was looking at reducing inflammation in humans after surgery. And he spent many, many years putting this together, and he spent a lot of time putting together all the regulatory paperwork in order to initiate the study. Despite all that, when I brought the faculty member over to him, he was more than willing to share his ideas with her, and ultimately he contributed to mentoring through the process of both writing and submitting a grant that incorporated many of his ideas. So just one example of his generosity. Don interacted with many individuals, including those in his laboratory, other junior and senior investigators, and pretty much anyone who would walk by his door, which was open all the time. So he really had an open door policy. I spent many hours talking to him. And many of the topics we discussed were topics that were mentioned by other people in the research service as well, as we discussed things in his office. And so these included, some have already been mentioned, his favorite Netflix shows, his experience with his son-in-law driving Formula One cars, his grandchildren, travel, food. So Dina said fried eggs on pizza from Sopranos. He had a joy of cycling, the state of the world, and our role in that state. And one of his favorite topics, of course, were politicians. And particularly in more recent times, we had a lot of discussions about our orange-haired friend. Don was quick-witted, and he had an excellent sense of humor. His lab colleagues had memories of him telling many humorous stories that he would tell during their lab meetings on late Friday afternoons. So Dina is an individual who worked with Don for many years, and she recalled a couple of stories. One was a story about his hatred for his loud cockatoo that he had as a pet. The other story she recalls is when he went to the gas station to fill up his tank and he forgot to put the hose back on the pump. So he drove away, and the hose was dragging behind his car, and as he was driving down the road, people were honking at him to get his attention, but instead of recognizing the fact that they were trying to help him, he was showing his displeasure by giving them a middle finger. Some of the stories also involved some of his lab colleagues as well. So Mariana is another individual who collaborated with Don over the years. And she recalls one day when Don drove her home because she had her car in her driveway that had a flat tire. And so he drove her home, and when they got to her place, he generously said to her that he would go ahead and change the tire on her car, but that he needed her to go into the house to find this very complicated tool that was going to allow him to change the tire easily without cursing. And so Mariana went into the house and she was looking diligently for this tool, and it took her quite a while. And when she came back out, the The tire had been changed, and all the necessary cursing had already occurred while she was in the house. It took care of itself. So I and many others are going to miss Dawn greatly. As I pass, as I pass his door each morning, it's a stark reminder to me of the fragile nature of life. And for many of us, there's still the expectation that when we pass by his door, that it's going to be open and that he'll be there sitting, waiting for us to have another conversation. So we are going to miss Don very much.
Hi, I'm from New York City, so I probably don't need this because I always say I have a taxi voice. In fact, my New York accent, Don said, was charming. He told me I sounded like my cousin Vinny's. But that was charming because Don always made everything seem much better no matter what it was. 3 years ago, I was interviewed on CNN. I run a foundation for children with cancer. And Don loved CNN and watched CNN all the time. I was being interviewed by Anna Cabrera. And he said I went running for a pen, and I felt like I just had to make a donation. And he donated to us. Then I called him and I said, thank you so much, you're so generous, that's wonderful. And that was it. And the next year, he made another donation. I called up, I said, thank you very much. And I'm a widow for 6 years, and he was single, but anyway, I called up and said thank you. And then this past October, he called up, he made a donation, and I called up and I said thank you so much. And he said, we started talking and texting, and then he said, can I ask you something? So what I said, can I take you to dinner? And I said, but where? And he said, I'll come to New York City. I love Manhattan. I love New York City. So we got to know each other, and Don was such a wonderful support. He came to New York a number of times, spoke so much about his family and how absolutely he loved his son-in-law. He used to say he can do just anything. He said he does everything. I said, you really love your son? He goes, oh, best guy in the whole wide world. Stevie does everything. He's so kind, so wonderful, and he can fix anything. His daughter was his kitty cat that he called, and I hope you don't mind me telling the secret name that only was yours. And he was a very private guy, but we just got to, I guess we were at the stage of our lives where it was really nice to have somebody who understood each other. His grandsons, Paul and Louis who talked in Swahili. And I don't know if you know this, but Louis can click in Swahili, real Swahili, and his dad made a video of it. And he just, every Sunday and every weekend, and Paul wanted to one time know how come he didn't ask permission to come visit me in New York City, because the weekends were theirs, not ours. And we were going to go to Sonoma, California, and Napa, and today we would have been drinking wine in Sonoma, so this wasn't supposed to happen. And he was just very friendly with a lot of little kids. And we had a little girl who had died, who was 5 years old. Her name was Sky. Parents were from Indonesia. And Don sent me this poem, and I'd just like to read it to you, not knowing ever that this would be anything for him. 'Tis a fearful thing to love what death can touch, a fearful thing to love, to hope, to dream, to be and oh, to lose. A thing for fools, this and a holy thing to love. For your life has lived in me, your laugh once lifted me, your word was a gift to me. To remember this brings painful joy. 'Tis a human thing to love, a holy thing to love. What death has touched. He's really missed. He's one of the finest men I ever knew, and he lives on in you, Louis, and you, Paul, both of you. Keep remembering all the wonderful times with your grandfather. I see so much of him in you. Thank you. Oh, he did get to meet Anna Cabrera. When the last time he was in New York, Anna became a volunteer of my organization and a friend, so she wasn't just an anchor on CNN. And Don, of course, picked out the perfect restaurant at Rockefeller Center so she could come from television and come right there and not have to run across town to a restaurant, and that he would have some hors d'oeuvres ready, and he always planned and everything. I mean, he just, everything you were saying is exactly right. And I'm sorry he wasn't here to show me his beautiful town, Bloomfield. I remember Bloomingdale's, that's where I remember Bloomfield, but I have no idea what Michigan was. I've never been here. And you have a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful country. And he also told me about coming to South Carolina with you and how everybody got along so well. And, he just, even though he's a very, very private person, we got to talk. And I'm so thankful to have had him in my life, and he still loves.
Everyone, thank you all for sharing. This does conclude our services here this afternoon. We are going to dismiss the chapel. I'll begin in the rear of the chapel. I just ask that everyone please remain in your seats until I've dismissed your row. I'll ask you to come up the aisle on my left-hand side. You can take your leave of Don's family here, and then exit on the right-hand side, just doing a little loop in the chapel. And then just step quietly and directly to your cars. We want to give his children here a few moments of privacy. At that time, we'll hear another song by Jim Lyons. Thank you all.